Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. I'm Steph McKenna from the National Centre for Writing, based at Dragon Hall in Norwich, UNESCO City of Literature. Today I'm joined by my colleague Vicky Maitland, who's Programme Officer here at NCW, and she hasn't been on the pod for a little while. How are you today, Vicky?
I'm very well, thank you, Steph. Yeah, it's been a long old time since I last podded, so very excited to be back.
I think the last time you were on the podcast, I wonder if we were even in the midst of lockdown and we were having to do this remotely all the time.
I think we must have been, yes. Yeah, it was a long old while ago, so probably.
Well, it's lovely to have you back. And before I introduce the main portion of this episode, I wanted to ask you about our online tutored writing courses that we've got coming up in May. And these are developed in partnership with the University of East Anglia, who are a very prestigious university based in Norwich, where we are. And these courses are pretty unique, aren't they? Because you get regular fortnightly feedback from a tutor on your creative writing.
Yeah, they're pretty unusual in that they offer kind of the perfect combination of self-paced, self-led learning. So every fortnight or every 3 weeks for our longer courses, materials are unlocked on our course platform, and you can work through those materials at your own pace within that period of time. But then at the end of that fortnight or 3 weeks, you submit an assignment for direct personal feedback from your tutor. So you kind of get the ideal combination of being able to go through things at your own pace, in your own time, alongside whatever else you've got on in your life, as well as direct personal feedback on a regular basis with someone who's an expert in their field.
And the classes are quite small, aren't they? You get a small number of participants and they can be situated anywhere in the world.
Yeah, so it's up to 15 participants per course, and we've had students from all over the globe. So the way the course works can be really flexible to a wide range of time zones and also life circumstances.
That's fantastic. And I've actually been reading some testimonials recently from previous students for our website, and we've had some really fantastic feedback. There's, kind of things that you wouldn't even expect, like people saying that obviously, the course has helped with build their confidence with their writing, but actually it's also helped with, their mental health. There's all kinds of benefits, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. And as you say, it's not just about kind of the raw skills and techniques and kind of methodology that's taught on these courses. It is about the holistic approach to writing, the building of confidence, and the gaining of a community of like-minded writers at similar stages of their writing journey. And it's been really brilliant. I know that a number of our kind of alumni from the course have gone on to then do further study at university level, possibly MA level, but also have gone on to become published writers, authors in their own right, award-winning poets. So it's been really lovely to see their journey through the courses onto their own future success.
And that's the dream. That's what we like to hear. So we've got courses run 3 times a year, and our next semester starts in May. What courses are on sale now for people to book onto?
So we have got a number of courses across a variety of genres, including Start Writing courses, which are 12 weeks long, in fiction, poetry, crime fiction, creative non-fiction, historical fiction, and memoir. And we've also got a Next Steps course, which is 18 weeks long, in crime fiction too.
And where can people find out more about these courses?
Can find out all the information, including start dates and any application procedures, on our website, nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Now, I'm very happy to introduce my conversation with Richard Balls, who is the author of 3 books: A Furious Devotion, The Life of Shane MacGowan, Be Stiff, The Stiff Record Story, and Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, The Life of Ian Dury. Richard was a news journalist for 20 years. He started his career in local papers in London before moving to Dublin, and now he lives in our fine city of Norwich. His latest book about the life of Shane MacGowan, the legendary Irish musician, was published in 2021 by Omnibus Press. I spoke to Richard about the rather unconventional process for gathering information for this book and how he approaches interviews with people who may feel reluctant to speak or want to be altogether quite difficult. We also touch on the ethics of non-fiction and a writer's responsibility to not cast judgment, as well as that tricky balance between myth and reality when writing about someone who's in the spotlight. So here I am, speaking a few weeks ago with the brilliant Richard Bulls. Well, Richard, welcome to The Writing Life. It's so lovely to have you. I've been wanting to catch up with you for quite a while, and we keep missing each other at the Dragon Hall socials, so it's really lovely to meet properly in person.
We do, no, I'm really looking forward to this. I really have been for a long time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on a Friday afternoon. We're sitting in a really nice studio space at Access Creative College in Norwich, and I recently read your book, A Furious Devotion, The Life of Shane MacGowan, after buying it for my dad for Christmas and then thinking I absolutely have to read this myself as well, as a big Shane MacGowan fan. And it's a fantastic read. It's so very well written. So I'm really looking forward to teasing apart the process of writing that and your other music related books. So before we get started, could you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do in case any of the listeners haven't heard of your work before?
Absolutely, yeah. Steph, I'm Richard Bulls, and I'm from Norwich, so I'm a native of the city, and my whole life has been writing. I was a journalist for 20 years. A lot of that was spent in Ireland. I worked in Dublin for the national papers, the daily papers out there, the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, the Irish Press, and the Evening Herald, and lots of other papers. And then when I sort of came out of journalism, I went into communications. I was still a full-time communications person. So obviously a lot of that involves writing and editing. So I write web content, press releases, stories and so on, and case studies. But also the books have become a really important thing to me personally. These are things that I do outside of work. And I've done, over the last 20 years, I've done three books. The first was about Ian Dury, Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, and that was the biography of Ian, the first one that came out. Then I did a book about Stiff Records, which was obviously the label that gave birth to Ian, Elvis Costello, The Pogues, Madness, and many other bands, The Damned. And then a few years ago, I got to write a book about Shane MacGowan, who I'm a huge fan of.
Me too. Were you a journalist and then you started publishing these books, or did you finish your journalism career? I was
still a journalist. I was actually working at the Irish Times, freelancing there when I got the sort of gig with Omnibus to do the book about Ian, and I moved back to Norwich in 1999, pretty much to write that book, really, because I knew that I had to be interviewing people who were here, all of the people in the reverse, obviously with Shane, where most of the people were in Ireland. In this instance, most of them were in London or the UK, and I came back and worked for the Eastern Daily Press, so I was a journalist there. And funnily enough, in my sort of career as a journalist, I was never a music journalist. I never really worked for music magazines. I mean, I did the odd article. I did write some stuff for Hot Press when I was in Dublin, but I was never actually a music writer. I always wrote about daily politics, general news, crime particularly. So most of my career was spent writing about murder cases, missing people, drugs, alcohol abuse, just crime in general. It's the books have led me down a really different path.
And that was more of a personal interest than the kind of music.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day and saying that I wasn't really very academic particularly. I was okay, but nothing special. Wasn't really interested. All I was doing when I was at school was just playing records and looking at Top of the Pops, and that's where my head was. Yeah. I wasn't really, that committed to academic things, and I just really got into music. And I went to my first ever gig in 1981. I went and saw Madness at the UEA, and in terms of live music for me has been such a big part of my life ever since. So it's something that I'm hugely passionate about. So to get to write about people like Ian and Shane, who are just absolute idols to me, was a huge privilege.
And it goes to show that you don't have to have an academic background to be a great writer and to write about the things that you're really passionate about.
I didn't go to university. I mean, most people now go to university. When I was at school, that was much less of a thing, and only much smaller percentages of people went off to higher education. So I pretty much just went from City College in Norwich doing A-levels and then going into journalism college for a year, and I was straight on a paper. But I think I was still 19 when I actually started work on a newspaper in London, and I never looked back. And I think kind of writing saved me really, because I wasn't ever going to pull up any trees in sort of academic life or any other fields, but writing, just having that one skill has actually kept me going for an entire career.
So the experience and the skills you've kind of gained as a journalist must have been really helpful for that sort of that movement into longer form storytelling. But was there anything that kind of surprised you when you started the process of writing that first book? Was there anything that was kind of like, oh wow, I haven't done this before, or wasn't what I anticipated based on what you've been doing before?
Definitely. I mean, I think there was a lot of crossover, clearly, because journalism involves getting information from people, gaining their trust, and leaving them feeling that they could talk to you easily. And that was something, obviously, that was hugely important in writing a biography, non-fiction, because you really, in order to get to grips with your subject, it's not a question of just talking to them. Obviously, you need to talk to as many people as possible, particularly ex-girlfriends, band members, family members, people who've really been close to them and can really tell you not just about their career and the things that you probably know about already, but actually what kind of person are they, what makes them tick. I think what was a surprise probably is just the scale of a book. I mean, I probably would have written, in journalism, say 1,500 words would be a long feature. If I've ever written 2,000 words, that will probably be the most. So the Ian Dury book was probably 140,000 words. So I think it's the scale of the task, which is pretty daunting when you haven't done that before. And at times that's just like looking up the face of a mountain, and you're thinking, oh my God, this is just such a huge project. But actually also just scoping that into how do you tell that story? How do the chapters get set out? What is the journey? How do you want to tell that? So it's a completely different thing to do, a completely different skill.
I mean, do you spend a lot of time sort of planning and structuring? Because obviously some writers, particularly say fiction novelists, will, some people might spend a lot of time planning, some people might just let it flow. But I imagine with the sort of books that you're writing, it takes a lot of sort of pre-planning and research and structuring and kind of piecing things together.
Definitely. There's a lot of work in the planning stages. I mean, I like to try to tell the stories chronologically. I have read music books which have been sort of done piecemeal, and it jumps about and from the beginning of the career to the end and back, and you're not quite sure sometimes where you are. Personally, I prefer a kind of more traditional structure, a sort of chronology, but you still have to decide, obviously, what are the moments that you leave at the end of the chapter, leave people wanting more. And then how do you begin the next chapter, and then maybe take them off on something different, a different part of the person's life or a different stage. So there's a lot of, and I think that's a really important thing. I mean, for me, one of the things we've lost in a way with music is with Spotify, everything is just, you listen to one song, it's shuffled, but records were made with a sequencing of songs that wasn't just thrown up in the air and they landed there. This was deliberate, and it was meant to be listened to in that way. And I think with books, you have to kind of it is about that sequencing within the structure. That
kind of curation, I guess, the curatorial skill, yeah. And you, as you say, the books that you've written all feature dozens and dozens of interviews with lots of people, lots of archival research, interviews with the core subjects themselves. I mean, how do you even begin to organise yourself with that? Do you have a process for how you arrange your time? Do you start at a particular source first? Do you have a sort of a routine for that, or have you kind of felt?
I work full time, and I do the books in parallel with a full time job, and then that's always been the case. So that all three of the books I've been working full time when I wrote them. People say to me, "How do you get time to write books and do that?" I don't know the answer to that. I mean, especially the way I do them, which is, you could make life easy for yourself and interview far fewer people and do less research and try and get more information out of one person if you think that they've got a lot of information. That's really, I never try and make anything easy for myself. I always seem to make it as hard as possible, which is, tracking down people. One good thing and a major difference between the Ian Dury book and the Shane one was the Dury one was researched in the late 90s. Where the internet was a kind of barren place. It was a kind of desert. In it, and I was still tracking people down by banging on doors and ringing people on landlines and really, and a lot of people I never tracked. People I wanted to talk to for that book, I was able to. But obviously nowadays it's much easier because most people have some kind of digital footprint somewhere. There'll be somebody they're either on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, and you can find people much more easily. So that's a that's a gift in terms of the research of a book. That's just so much easier. But I interviewed about 60 people for the Shane book, and a lot of that did involve going to. I always, out of choice, I always interview people face to face. I don't think you get much more information. You get better information when people trust you. You build up that in face-to-face situations. So, mostly I like to meet people in a coffee shop, a pub, their house.
Somewhere comfortable, I guess.
Somewhere comfortable.
Relaxed surrounding.
And could be backstage sometimes at a venue, whatever. But however that you can do that. I did interview some people via Zoom and things like that, or over the phone. Sinead O'Connor was one. Because that was the only way I could do the interview, but got amazing chat with her about Shane. Really fantastic, because what I was doing with the Shane book I didn't want it to be another Pogues book, because there'd already been lots of Pogues books that were very good, and I wasn't going to add any value by doing that. I wanted to write a book about Shane and what makes him tick. Probably the answer is nobody really knows that. But I thought I'm going to have a pretty good stab at it by asking people like her who've known him for a really, really long time. They're not just like passing people, passing ships in the night. She really knows him, and so do obviously his family and other close friends. So, I interviewed a lot of people for that.
And you've said you've managed to sort of, with a book like A Furious Devotion, you've managed to secure exclusive interviews with people around Shane who haven't spoken to anyone before, so ex-girlfriends or his English teacher. How do you gain the trust of those people who might be reluctant to speak to you at first?
I think with researching a biography, I think it's like a sort of domino effect. When you interview those first people, you're hoping that obviously they will say to other people, I met this guy, Richard, he came round to do this thing about, Shane, whatever. Oh, he seems an okay guy.
He's all right, yeah.
He's all right, and the things he asked seemed respectful and blah blah blah. So in that sense, you hope that word of mouth will help smooth the way for you, and that you can get the trust of people as you go along. With Ian Dury, for example, he had cancer right at the beginning, and I knew that he was extremely ill, and I went to Blackheath Halls with. It's a bit of a long story, but I was interviewing somebody from Kilburn and the High Roads, Charlie Sinclair, who used to play bass in that band with Ian, and he drove me to Blackheath Hall. So I arrived with Charlie, and we went into the dressing room, and Ian was very obviously delighted to see Charlie, his old pal. He didn't know me and had never heard of me, and he really kind of dissed me. You know, like Charlie was saying, I've got Richard here, you know, he's doing the book, and that, I know nothing about no book. Who's he? You know. And I just thought, fine, that's fine. You know, absolutely, he has no reason to speak to me. So I just thought, okay, right. So that's okay. Let's just let's kind of start from the outside. Let's treat this like a target, that he's in the middle, and I'm going to just gradually work my way towards that centre, being really careful because, you know, I mean, he's pretty can be notoriously grumpy, and so I had to tread really carefully. So I almost picked people to start with who didn't know him so well. That weren't going to immediately go to him and say, I've had this guy ring me up, he's been hassling me, whatever. You know, and just gently move towards the centre, talking to people and just gaining that trust, like you said. And that did, it was, you know, it was kind of torturous process at times, but it worked.
And you kind of did something similar with Shane, so you got to know Shane through someone that he kind of knew and trusted as well. Yeah,
and I mean, with Shane, I mean, you know, he has a very, very small little group of friends. He's not somebody that is out all the time, particularly nowadays because of his mobility issues. So there's not many people in that little orbit of his. So to get into that was so lucky, and that was through Paul, who I met. He facilitated an interview that I did with Shane for the Stiff Records book, and that was at a sort of bistro in London. And, you know, I knew that I sensed straight away I had to meet him outside a clinic in Belgravia, a private clinic, in the middle of the afternoon. He comes out wearing shades, staggers out of this place. He's, you know, and he's off he goes along the pavement, and I'm thinking, again, you know, I think, okay, fine, you know, it's. You know, he said hello, but, you know, I could sense this is not going to be easy. No. We're just going to take this really handy. We're going to sit and have a few drinks. Let's just get him settled. And Paul was kind of winking at me, going, you know, yeah, you know, just for the minute, let's just take it easy. And you have to just roll with it. You just have to roll with it and think, okay, we might sit and have drinks for several hours, and maybe then will be the time, you know, to speak to him. I mean, during the course of that, I mean, he fell asleep on my digital recorder on the table.
Brilliant.
He went off and managed to lock himself in a toilet in the venue, and we had to go and get the staff to go and get him out. You know, so those even in that short window, those things happened.
You had a sense of what might be.
Yeah, and I kind of thought, you know, he's so interesting. I sensed that he was somebody who was actually quite different from the way that most people thought he would be, and that just really got, you know, whetted my appetite for wanting to spend more time around him.
So conventional interview techniques were absolutely not going to cut it with this book, and when I was reading it, I so enjoyed, and I just got such a strong sense of your persistence, but in a way that made Shane feel very, very comfortable. So, you know, you had one-to-one conversations with him at home or at the pub or around his family. He clearly does not like direct questions. And there are subjects that he actually doesn't have any interest talking about. For example, the Pogues. So, you know, a huge part of his life and his career, and he's not interested in talking about it.
No.
So how did you adjust you've talked a little bit about that, you kind of had to adjust your technique to make Shane feel more comfortable, but how did you tease the most kind of crucial moments of his life story from the man himself without making it feel kind of invasive to him?
I mean, that is a brilliant question. I mean, this was the nub of it, really. So Paul took me over to Dublin with him, and he just said to me, look, you know, we're going to go into Shane's flat, and we're going to, you know, and we were there for like days at a time. There were times, I went over 5 times to Ireland during the course of the book. And all of those occasions, I was at some point in Shane's flat. Sometimes I actually stayed over and slept on a mattress in a back room of his flat. Being around him and stuff is not for everyone. Let me tell you. You know, it's not for the faint-hearted. So it's also not for people who don't have a lot of patience. Now, I don't actually think that I'm a particularly patient person,
Really?
but actually, if I am right, and I'm not actually very patient, I had to teach myself immense patience. The first time I ever went into his flat, and we were there, and he's incredibly generous and very quiet. He's not. I mean, he's known as this hellraiser because that's what the tabloid headlines have told us for decades that he is. He sits really quietly. He talks quietly. He just goes, "Oh, get yourself a drink there, Richard." He just wants you to feel at home. But he hates being interviewed. He's always hated being interviewed. So straight away, I'm thinking, why am I writing a book about somebody who hates being interviewed? Not only that, but as you said, he hates being interviewed about his career and his work. That's the thing that you cannot ask him about. There's no point asking about, that tour and that record. And it's just that, literally he's going to switch it right off. So I'm thinking, the first visit, I actually was sitting in his, and I thought, right, I'm not even going to try and record anything on this trip. Not just in that moment, but on the whole trip. I just thought this trip is a reconnaissance mission to build trust with this guy, and if I can go back to Norwich from Ireland and he's thinking, well, he's okay, then that has been
mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Mission MacGowan is off to a good start, and Operation Shane, and that actually did really serve me well. I never really interviewed him at all. I mean, it wasn't like that. He knew that I had the recorder. We would be sitting in, several of us there having a glass of wine, because white wine is Shane's, drink of choice these days. He just sits there with a bottle of wine, sharing it all with us, and it was really enjoyable. But he also watches television 24 hours a day. Even when he goes to bed, the telly is left on with him facing towards it. And crucially, it's on a blaring volume. So even when he was talking to me and I actually was recording something, and I was thinking, great, he's saying so, I'm going to get this on, I'm recording a bit here. Even then, I'm thinking, but will I be able to hear it? Because, first of all, the television is blaring because we've got The Godfather on, or Hang 'em High, or whatever he was watching. And also, he is very difficult to understand, even when he's speaking anyway. So, when you're thinking, this is good, we've got onto this great bit that I want to talk about his school, or his childhood or something, but it's all, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's so unintelligible.
Yeah, he's not the clearest speaker.
No,
anyway,
and then you get that sort of rattlesnake laugh at the end of every sentence, punctuating the whole thing. So, in terms of interviewing conditions,
it's like the loudest safari you've ever.
Yeah. So you've got blaring television. You've got somebody who's hard to hear. You've got somebody who hates being interviewed, doesn't want to talk about their work, and most of the times you're ever going to get anything from them will be very late at night or in the middle of the morning.
And when you mentioned, there are lots of other books about the Pogues out there. So if someone wants to read a book about the Pogues and that career, they certainly can, but this book is very much about Shane, and I really got, it was those moments like talking about his having TV or film on in the background all the time, or all those kind of really private, intimate things about him that I found to be absolutely illuminating and fascinating. And I think you could easily read a book like this without really knowing the Pogues, and still find it a really, really interesting account of a very unique person. Did the sense of kind of what was most important to him, such as his memories of his childhood and sort of his time spent on his grandparents' farm, did that help to did that end up changing the way you structured the story? Did it kind of take things in a different direction to what you first anticipated? I
think it did, really, and I think it sort of vindicated my feeling at the beginning that I shouldn't write a book about the Pogues and the music. Obviously, the Stiff book was very much about what records came out and when, and how they did in the charts, and the whole direction of the company kept changing. But here, this was about him, and I wanted to try to get to the parts of Shane that other people hadn't ever really got to. Also, myths have over the years grown up like weeds around Shane's story, to the point where actually, it's completely invisible now where he came from. I mean, you've had actual documentaries on TV that have said he was born in Ireland. He was born on the banks of the River Shannon. He was born in Kent. So, I mean, that's the level of research that people have done in the past. However, to be fair to them, the reason they said things like that was because he has said that he was born in Ireland. And I've read interviews where he asked that direct question. He said, I was born in Tipperary. So you can see where this has all come from. But also, I had to kind of untangle all of this kind of mythology, without upsetting him, because his line has always been that he grew up in Ireland. His parents went to England, and they kind of almost left him behind with his aunts and uncles and grandparents to be looked after. But none of this ever happened. This is not what happened, and it was actually very important that for me to say he was brought up in the UK, because that's what informed the Pogues. That's what shaped the band. All of those early songs are about London. They're not about Tipperary in the main. They're about King's Cross. They're about Hammersmith. They're about all these places places in Soho that he hung out. And that's what really gave the Pogues, the lyrics of the Pogues, that kind of flavour. So for me, it was. You're right. It did. Sort of direct the course of the narrative, because these were the things that are so important to him. And then it was about understanding why.
It's the why, isn't it, more than that? And you mentioned that I was going to ask you about kind of myth versus reality, and as you say, there are actually some truths that are important to the story, but then there are other myths that you might, I don't know, if you were telling another story, you might want to dispel the myths, but the myths are that they are part of Shane. And as you say, there are some fabrications that even he believes about himself now. So you can't, it must be difficult you don't want to untangle it completely, because those myths make him what he is. Yeah,
he's a great storyteller. I mean, Ireland has such an amazing tradition going back centuries of storytelling, and Shane is part of that history, that wonderful history, and he has a very, very important place in the sort of Irish songbook and the storytelling history of the country, and he's revered quite rightly for that. But I mean, he actually believes a lot of this stuff. It's not that he is deliberately telling an untruth or trying to mislead you. He actually believes a lot of this stuff. So that's another difficult one, that you're walking a tightrope there, because you don't want to be untangling it to the point where he's kind of saying, well, look, this guy's writing a load of old stuff that's not right. I had to try and keep him on board, but equally I wanted to, for Siobhan and his dad Morris and other people, they were very keen that the book tells the story that they remembered. So it's a balancing act.
It's a tightrope. Yeah, you must have did you feel quite a lot of responsibility actually towards lots of different players, not just Shane?
I mean, sometimes as a biographer, it's I kind of think, why am I so arrogant that what makes me think that I could write about this person's life? I walk into their home, sitting there, recording stuff when they're trying to watch television and trying to have a drink. What makes me think that that I have that that right? So, and I often feel a bit conflicted that sometimes you think I really am just kind of intruding. That's the ultimate intrusion in a way, that you are basically stepping into someone's life and saying, I'm doing this is what I'm this is what I'm going to ask you about, I'm going to write this. I mean, it was done with him, so it was authorised in that sense, that he was cooperating as much as Shane ever cooperates with anybody, which is another whole story. But it is a huge responsibility, but then also you need actually humility, really, once you start doing it. You can't, you have to be come over as somebody that people can trust, and that they know that you are going to respect the information that they've given you, and it's an enormous weight of responsibility.
Do you still feel it now, or is it lifted? Does it feel lifted now that?
I think it's lifted because I remember with the Ian book, I remember Mickey Gallagher talking to me. He's the keyboard player in the Blockheads, and I remember him saying to me, he rang me and he said, "I read this last night," and he said, "I read it. I sat up nearly all night and read the whole thing in one sitting and cried. It really, really teared up." And because obviously at this point Ian had died, by the time the book had come out, so that was still very raw for his family and for the band. So that was pleasing for me in the sense that this was somebody who's very, very close to Ian and who had actually helped me with that book more than anybody, Mickey. So for him to say that, that did reassure me that I had been respectful. But also, I try to tell people's lives as truthfully as possible, and a lot of the reviews of the Ian book and the Shane book have all commented about how honest it is, brutally honest at times, and that is a real tightrope. Trying to sort of be honest and call out things without being disrespectful about it.
Yeah, there's a broad spectrum of emotions in a book like A Furious Devotion. There's nostalgia and there's warmth and there's a lot of humour and there's a lot of respect for great talent. But as you say, your writing is also not shying away from the dark realities of someone's life. And there's some very complex and contradictory behaviour there, and actually some behaviour that's actually kind of unacceptable in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of drug and alcohol misuse too. But there isn't. I didn't feel like there was a moral judgment there from you as a writer. And do you feel it's your responsibility to leave judgment at the door with this kind of storytelling? And is that a difficult thing to achieve?
I think that's brilliantly put. I've not heard it put in that way. I think it's. I don't want that. First of all, I never want my voice as the author, as the biographer, to encroach. Yeah, it's not about me. It's about the subject, and that must always be the case. I don't like this kind of, it's a bit like the Jules Holland thing. I just feel like saying every time I see that, it's like, get out of the way. I want
Step back.
I want to see the people that are on the show, not you. And it's never about the writer. I think with Shane at the very beginning, I had that little bit at the beginning of the book where I talked about the writing of it briefly. I think because it was so extreme, because the interviewing conditions were so unbelievably difficult, and I don't mean that in any way as a disrespect to Shane, who was generous to a fault with his time, with his money. Just a lovely man, and I really enjoyed pretty much every moment that I spent with him. However, a lot of his behaviour is contradictory and so on, and you have to leave all that in there. It's for the readers to decide what they think is what makes him tick, why he feels a certain way about things, and also just make that difficultness a virtue. Make that a virtue. Just leave all that in there, warts and all, contradictions. That's what makes people who they are. So yeah, I think it's for me to present everything, not to come to particular conclusions myself, and then leave other people to decide what they think.
And the only occasionally you might have some, maybe not conclusions, but insight or judgments made by the people around Shane. So I got the sense that, some people felt that he did something for a particular reason, or they thought that his musical career was enhanced by something, or maybe actually it was to his detriment. But those pieces were in there, but your actual, your personal sort of judgment was definitely, I didn't get a sense that was
Well,
there at all.
thank you for saying that. I mean, I think it is. No one really wants that voice getting in the way and obscuring the truths that are there. I mean, I think the point you make about, for example, was his writing enhanced by the use of alcohol and drugs. I think in the early days of the Pogues, when the image was, that's where the real image started, the hard drinking band, this kind of band of brothers that were going to take on the world, who were living the ultimate kind of rock and roll life. And, at that time, Shane was living in a bedsit, literally living underneath a pile of bottles and cigarette ends and all the rest of it and paraphernalia. And on the wall was a picture of Brendan Behan, who was effectively his kind of muse, really. And Behan pops up in songs. Pogue's songs in the early days. So I think there was definitely a sense in Shane that he thought being a hard drinking person was actually enhancing his lyrics and his ability to produce these songs. But then again, later you have to sort of look and say, well, now he hasn't recorded any original material, or released, I should say, rather than recorded, for over 25 years. That's a hell of a hiatus. And, again, it's for people to draw conclusions as to why, there was, the flame burned very brightly, but it didn't burn for that long. You look at that period of writing of early Pogues through to the last albums. That's quite a short little period, but the flame really did burn bright for that time.
And this isn't, well, I say it's not really a question, but I also wanted to comment on one of the other really illuminating things for me was that, as you say, the book doesn't, it kind of leaves the reader to make their own judgments and their own decisions and sort of gain their own insights. But one thing I felt that you did explain to the reader that they shouldn't feel is pity for Shane. I really got the sense that, whether it's the life that you would choose to lead or not, this is Shane's life, and he has chosen pretty much all of it. And that felt like a side to his entire lifestyle and his character that I hadn't seen before as well. So that's amazing. I'm really pleased to hear that, because I mean, obviously, because he hasn't walked now for 7 years, and he's very immobile. But you're right. I mean, nobody should feel pity for Shane at all. And Sinead O'Connor was really clear on this point. He is not to be pitied. He has chosen this life right from the outset. When he discovered punk, which was an absolute moment in his life when he was facing a real lack of direction. He'd come out, he'd been treated in Bethlehem Hospital, had a horrendous, what must have been a horrendous time experience in there, comes out, goes to the show, sees the Sex Pistols, and the rest is history. He just literally just looked up on stage, saw this goofy, ginger-haired Irish guy, second generation, exactly same background as Shane, and it was a real kind of like Damascene moment, So, that's he has chosen the life that he's lived, and lots of things have happened along the way. Tragically, lots of people have died along the way. Some of them in Shane's flat, very young people in their 20s, and I really didn't try to shy away from any of that in the book. I wanted that to be in there because these are the consequences of that kind of lifestyle sometimes, and he's not to be pitied at all, and he's not looking for it. And this book took a long time. I'm sure all of your books actually have taken a long time to research and write, years rather than months. And sometimes, especially when you're interviewing or dealing with a tricky customer, things don't go to plan. They don't go well. And I imagine there were moments when Shane made it pretty clear that he wasn't in the mood or not in the interested. Today's not the day. Did you ever feel like things were sort of stalling or not getting anywhere? Did you ever feel a sense of kind of, why on earth am I even doing this? How did you persevere?
I mean, when I think about it, I look back and think, I was sort of lying on a mattress in the back of Shane's flat in Dublin, and you kind of wake up, and it's like that thing. Every time you wake up, it's like you think, oh, for a second you think, where am I? You know, looking around, you think, oh yeah, I'm in Shane MacGowan's flat, and then you sort of like, I was pad along the corridor, and I can see his top of his head. He's still in the armchair. You know, this is like, you know, in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning or something, and he's still there, hasn't gone to bed. Probably the telly's still on, and he's still got his glass of wine there. He's incredible, you know, that he, Steve Lillywhite, the producer of a couple of the Pogues albums, he produced Fairy Tale New York, famously, that where Shane sang with his wife, Kirsty MacColl. He said that the only two people that he's worked with who he would describe as true bohemians were Shane MacGowan and Keith Richards. You know, and he's worked with a lot of people. You know, time means absolutely nothing to Shane. It's not a thing. And that's where I was fortunate, because the only way really to get information is to be around him for so long. If you try to arrange, this is what journalists have had over the years, they'll try and arrange to meet Shane somewhere. Hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. You know,
it doesn't show up.
No, it doesn't show, and for hours and hours, or may not show at all. And you know, someone else who was doing a documentary described it as being like wildlife photography. You know, it's like trying to track a snow leopard and sitting in the freezing cold for days and days and nothing, and then all of a sudden you get a few seconds of footage and it's gone again. That's it. It's like that with Shane. You know, it's like nature, filming nature in the raw, and you've just got to roll with it. And there were times, definitely, when I thought, what a waste of time this is. We've been sitting here for days. I haven't recorded anything. You know, he's obviously not interested. And there were other times when, I think I wrote about it in the beginning of the book, saying, I can't remember even what we were discussing, but he got really annoyed. And I think I asked if I could turn the television down, which is like, you do not ask Shane to turn it. But I just thought, I've had enough of this now. It's 3 a.m. I have to get something, because I was on a timer. You know, the meter was running for me because I live in Norwich. And I was sitting in his flat in Dublin. I couldn't be there forever. I had to get back and do a job. So, you know, so in the one sense, although I had to roll with it as much as possible with him and take his irascibility and just brush it off, equally, the meter was running for me. I had to get something. So it was, there were times when I just thought, this is crazy. What am I doing?
How did you keep going? It was those moments of kind of, I don't want to say those moments of magic, but I guess when he finally did, you know, open up a little bit more.
Yeah, I suppose the thing was that I knew ultimately that I was in a really, really privileged position. You know, I was writing a book about Shane MacGowan with his cooperation, kind of, and the full cooperation of his sister and his dad. So everybody involved around the Pogues. I interviewed about 5 other people from the Pogues as well. So that's pretty much a clean sweep in terms of cooperation. So I was in that really privileged position. So I had to keep reminding myself when things were going badly that no one else was going to do a book that was going to come close to the kind of, you know, things that I was getting to. And I kept myself going with that, I think.
And do you know whether any of Shane's family or friends or Shane himself have read the book? Have you heard from them?
Siobhan was very, very helpful right from the beginning, and she was reading bits and pieces as we went along. Her and her dad absolutely love the book because they feel that, you know, it is the truth. This is the story that they know happened, and they also felt it was respectful for Shane. I mean, they love Shane. You know, they absolutely adore Shane, and it's a close family. Shane, I think, has read it. I mean, or read bits of it. Apparently, did say to someone recently that it was a good book. This is just hearsay, but somebody who was there. He probably denied that ever saying it. I mean, he did say from the outset, "I'll never read it," which is fine, and I actually never expected him to. So again, I think it's important not to have those kind of ambitions for it, because actually in a lot of like I say, if he's one of the ultimate bohemians, it's not important to him. He didn't ask for it to be written. I imposed myself on him, and I was only there under sufferance, as I was reminded on a few occasions. So you just have to roll with it and think, who else would get this privileged, position?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I absolutely love the book, and I'm really keen to read your 2 other books. I know less about Ian Dury actually, so it will be an interesting journey for me, and I'm certainly going to do it. Before we wrap up, what's on for you next? Have you got anything else in the pipeline book-wise? Have you got ideas knocking around?
I don't. I really desperately would like to have something. I always like to have a project in my head, however embryonic it is. I like to have something that I'm kind of working towards, and I don't really at the moment. I think Shane was such a big task. Not only because it obviously involved travelling to Ireland a lot, which backwards and forwards, and also just the sheer challenge of extracting information from somebody who is famously doesn't like talking, and is a man of very few words. So I think maybe that kind of did take quite a lot out of me, really. But I'm very keen to carry on writing about music. As I said to you, it was not something that I ever did really in my career as a journalist, although I reviewed gigs very often. So for me, it's such a privilege to write about my big passion in life, which is music. So I'm sure I will find something pretty soon.
Brilliant. Well, Richard, thank you so much for joining me on The Writing Life today. It's been lovely to have you, and I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future when you've written your next book.
Thank you so much.
A big thank you to Richard for his time. Please track down his books, especially A Furious Devotion. It's a fascinating read, even if you're not a Pogues fan. If you have questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Twitter and Instagram. We're on Facebook if you search for National Centre for Writing, and you can browse all of our courses, events, free writer resources and opportunities on our website, nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. You'll also find a form to sign up to our regular newsletter. As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation over on the website by going to the Support Us page. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your usual podcast channels, and please do leave us a review because it helps other people to find us. Thanks again, keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.